upcoming generation who's going to be entering the workforce, EDI is a key consideration for them. Anti-racism acknowledgement and commitment is a key consideration for the group. And so companies need to be able to have, not only just, statements. Everyone can have a statement. Everyone had a statement this last year, but now it's action time. And I think what's really challenging is how that action is sustained and how it's committed. Because I have seen in this last year, I'm sure others have observed the same thing, like the amount of equity, diversity, and inclusion, specialists, coordinators, managers, director positions that have shown up in Canada anyways over the last year has been astronomical. I've never seen this many positions like that ever in the context of Canada. But at the same time, you also have to look at, how long are these positions for? Are they term positions? Are they contract based? Are they, at a certain level of leadership where there's impact that may or may not be had across the institution? And those are things that you want to start to like unravel even further if EDI is a value for you in terms of where you go, because what type of resources are put in towards supporting, whether it's employee resource groups, whether it's, yes, we have an EDI policy, but we also need to make sure we have resources to implement that said policy, especially if we're external facing in the work that we do. So a lot of, at the end of the day, it's just a lot of questions that I think we aren't knowledgeable on what to ask, unless we've kind of gone down that path and now we're more aware. And so hopefully some of the things that we've all shared right now provides, potential candidates or people looking for different opportunities, just an added layer of due diligence to provide, in the basic things we look for in a career search, because that's going to impact retention as well. I know I haven't talked about retention at all, but I'm trying to make that connection very loosely, but it's connected, because if you align yourself with an organization and company that, connects with your values, you're likely to stay there longer than one that doesn't.
I have these conversations on a regular basis where companies reach out to me and they want to recruit diverse talent. And my first question to them, I said, can you describe your culture as an inclusive culture? Because if you can't describe your culture as an inclusive culture, the talent you recruit will go in one door and out the other door as soon as you get them. And so I think some companies, if not most companies, are really getting that we need to transform our culture, and that's going to help us attract diverse talent. That's going to help us, recruit the best diverse talent. Now, I will say this, and some of the panelists may have seen this as well, where a company, I've heard this criticism where a company will need a person of color in a position. They will promote someone that's not qualified into positions. That was a standing practice in corporate America for quite some time. Instead of going out and recruiting talent or developing talent, they'll move to put a representative of color in place that doesn't have the talent or the skills or knowledge or been trained to be at that level. And that person will perform very poorly and end up being let go because they weren't ready for those positions. So, I just have to have a serious conversation internally around these topics in order for them to come out in the public about their efforts. Because you see a lot of communication in the public about their efforts, but when you have those conversations internally with their employees, and I have them all the time, and their communication is not aligning with their actions.
I completely agree about looking at the leadership composition. That to me is one of the biggest signs of how the organization prioritizes diversity and inclusion. Secondly, if I were to, comment on someone who may be looking to work at that organization, I would say also look at their social media platforms and what they are putting out. Is it meaningful, or is it sort of more formative? And I think there's, something to be said for doing research in that way, and asking questions, right? I think during, particularly if you're interviewing for a position, I think while, we know that the power dynamics are always on the side of the employer in those situations, it's also important to ask some pointed questions. And one that a friend of mine who is an HR leader that's very committed to equity work always talks to is to ask them how they create a psychologically safe environment for their team members. And you can also tell a lot about an organization and their values throughout the whole recruitment cycle and experience. But again, really important to ask those questions as a prospective employee to gather your own data.
I know for a fact that like one of the biggest companies in the entire world that you would think is very diverse and inclusive, that I'm sure if you were to ask their HR team, they would tell you all the amazing things that you'd want to hear. And then as it turns out, their diversity hiring is abysmal. It's pretty terrible. And publicly speaking, there's a lot of like information about people of color and women in leadership roles who were quietly dismissed when they brought up issues of diversity and inclusion in that environment. So you make sure that you do your independent research, because you'll definitely find things that you might not necessarily find with just asking a lot of questions.
But I think what's more important is the response you get back, because right now we're at an elevated discourse. I think because of things that have happened over the last year where people are a little bit just more aware. And so I think boilerplate templates around, oh yeah, we're committed to diversity and inclusion aren't going to be enough. You ask how. Really good example, go to the annual reports if they're available and see what's been this consistent commitment around EDI, if that's a value that's strong for you. Because I think that also builds into that retention piece, right? The biggest context, I reflect on with this question, based on where I'm at right now in my career, I would be more comfortable in being able to, review a company's or organization's values and see how it aligns with me. But early on, I don't think I would have done that, because especially being fresh out of university where you have, student loans to pay off, you might just take the first thing that comes down your way. But I think being more mindful, at least at the beginning point in time, because one of the person mentioned, candidates do have a lot more power than we sometimes, think that they don't. And I think same thing goes for when we're actually employees of said organization, because if the values aren't aligning with us and we didn't kind of do that extra due diligence ahead of time, then we might likely be looking for our next gig, even while we're still freshly learning the new one. And so I think that values alignment is key.
The final point that I have, and I'm going to ask everyone in a quick 30 seconds or less, to maybe if you had 2 calls to action of an organization on areas they can focus on, what would they be? So I'm going to start with CJ.
Yeah, I would love to see companies focus more on mental health and burnout. I would love to see more companies figure out ways of how to include these conversations that we're having in their culture. And I think one of the ways that I found that was very helpful in doing that was going all the way to like brand Bibles and PR strategies, and kind of see like, well, what is the terminology that you typically use to showcase your company? This was mentioned before. So just being able to kind of figure out ways of how to tie in this language and these opportunities that we're talking about, and even the way that the company represents themselves is going to change even the lens of people that don't quite understand the importance of D&I. And again, mental health and burnout are such a huge component, especially when you're talking about people of color and women excelling in leadership roles, because we're really working our asses off to make a difference. So I'd love for companies to stress that.
Thank you so much, CJ. Dennis, 2 calls to action from you.
Number one, for organizations to listen to their employees. And I'm happy to see what organizations are doing now after the killing of George Floyd. But if these organizations had just listened to their employees, we wouldn't need a George Floyd to stimulate, to drive the hiring and promoting of people and women of color and so on and so forth. if employers just listen to their employees of color and women and let them share their experiences in the workplace, and for them to take that information, that data, and actually put a plan together to work on changing a culture, you know, that would be unequivocally number one. And I think number two, and I think this is really, really important, is that organizations develop talent. You know, I invariably get calls. I need to hire a black person. I need to I say, well, you don't have black people there. I mean, you don't, and you don't, you know, yeah, we have black people here. There's no one there that you've developed to step into these roles. And as a former corporate person, I understand that, you know, when you work in a monolithic culture, that culture is only developing and promoting people that look like them. And so my second thing was, you know, put an emphasis on emerging leaders of color and develop that talent so that they can emerge and, you know, step into those positions that you're looking to promote people of color. So instead of going and searching, you know, the earth for a director of, you know, a director of a position, you should have a manager ready to step into that position of color.
Great points, Dennis. Thank you so much. And Dr. Golnaragi.
Dennis, mic drop. Amazing, amazing points. I wholeheartedly agree with all of them. And I think your point around centering the voices of those that, you know, this work is intended for is critical. I stress that hugely. And I think, you know, when we are around decision-making tables, looking at policies and whatnot, ask yourself who is sitting at that table, whose voice is being heard, whose voice is absent, who's benefiting and who's not. And so I think, to Dennis's point, it's essential to ensure that we center the voices of those that that need to be there and perhaps are not. And that also starts with, you know, young people as we bring in early career people into our workplaces, ensuring that we leverage their voices and creativity in that process as well. Secondly, I'm going to make somewhat of you know, a comment around the business case for diversity. I think we have talked about the business case. There's research that shows that there's benefits to having women and you know, BIPOC and others within organizations and in leadership, but we don't use the business case when it comes to white identifying leaders. And so I would argue, one thing I do ask is, we know the business case is there, but let's focus on every single person is deserving of the same opportunities to thrive and flourish. And this is simply the right thing to do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And finally, Irfan, you have the last word.
Yeah, no, thanks everyone. It was really great to connect and learn from all of you. I think one of the things I was observing in the chat screen there is a lot of talk about policies, procedures, you know, all that fun stuff. But I think also don't let that take you away from the end goal, right? Because there's a really good, strong academic out in Europe that talks about EDI work, where we spend so much time doing the document. So working on policy, process, procedure, we spend years developing action plans, and then all of a sudden the work stops. So still do the doing of EDI versus just doing the document. So that's one of the things we always have to kind of keep that end post in mind for sure.